Okay, we are live.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the March 1st, 2021 Community Development Committee. If you would, Jenny, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Reiner,
Here.
Mayor Ambrose Grooms,
Here.
Mr. Keeler.
Here.
Before you have the meeting minutes of January 20th, 2021, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion
Aye.
carries. Staff update, Jenny? Now this is going to go to Jenny.
Yeah, it's going to be Colleen, I believe.
Colleen?
Yes.
Oh,
Good evening. It is going to be me tonight. I am going to share my screen here. Okay. And this is basically an overview wrapping up the end of 2020. I'm just giving you a slight update on where things are with our real estate, our competitive analysis with vacancy and cost with other communities. So this is just giving you an overview of the last 11 years of our economic development agreements. The measures are all over the board, as you can see. This is a tough metric to correlate with income tax growth, especially within the same year, mostly because when we do a deal, it takes several years to realize the job creation commitment that we record in the year that we do the deal. So for instance, in 2019, the new job commitments, very large bar there with over 2,300 commitments. That includes Quantum Health, but they didn't start moving in until the end of 2019, and they were a large part of our growth in 2020. So most of the income tax growth we can attribute to Quantum Health finally moving in a year after we did that deal. The 2019 number also includes the OSU Medical Center, ambulatory care facility. So again, counted in 2019, but those jobs and the taxes that come with it won't be realized until between 2022 and 2023. So you can see in 2020, we closed out the year, we did 4 economic development agreements, but overall, it was the 5th best job creation commitment year that we had in the last 11 years. So pretty good for a pandemic that we had the 5th highest commitment on new jobs. Okay, now I'm going to talk about our real estate a little bit. We finished 2020 with 13.5% office vacancy. Fourth quarter saw us absorbing the final office building on D Block in Bridge Park. So you can see the square footage, the red pipeline square footage dropped off in the fourth quarter of 2020 because we absorbed those D Block buildings. We also had Haggerty move into its space. Dublin did record the most square footage of new leases signed in 2020 than any other submarket in Central Ohio. So even though we had a slight uptick at the end of the year, overall in 2020, we did better than anybody else in the market. We're actively keeping an eye on subleases that could enter the submarket. We're not seeing a lot of people canceling or buying out their leases, but we are seeing some activity of leases where they're putting some of their suite on the submarket listings. We also hope to have Bridge Park G Block coming in soon so that we can get more product into our pipeline. This is our top seller when it comes to our office real estate. We're also keeping a really close eye on the Tuttle Mall and the office area around it. As the mall continues to decline and lose tenants, we are concerned about the marketability of the office buildings that we have immediately north of the mall area. Now looking at our industrial space here, we're at 6% vacant. There were 25 tenants at the end of the year looking for 10,000 square feet or more in the northern area in this type of flex or industrial space. So it remains in very high demand. Safe to say higher demand than office space. So we continue to work with local developers in the hopes that we can add some of this product to the pipeline this year, particularly in the West Innovation District. Looking at medical space, we're at 7.5% vacant, so very healthy. New construction activity in the red is the Ohio Health Cancer Facility and the OSU Medical Center. So Ohio Health is completing that infill development near Dublin Methodist Hospital. So that area is approaching build out with medical office. And then you have the OSU area in West Innovation, where we could spur additional medical product and retail growth. Hopefully we can add both of those to our pipeline over in the West Innovation District over the next year or two. And now looking at retail, we are 7% vacant. Again, we are lower than we should be here. So far, we have not had any COVID-related spikes in vacancy. But we are careful because 2021 could be critical for this category. Bridge Park continues to fill up despite the pandemic with its retail space. We're also hopeful that G Block will start yet another wave of retail inventory into the pipeline because it is relatively quiet with new construction. Comparing ourselves to the submarket with vacancy, you can see Easton continues to be a variable rate. They're sort of all over the place. We need to keep in mind they have 3 million square feet of office compared to our over 9 million. So they're just a third of the size of our office market. So it just takes a few tenants coming and going over at Easton to cause such fluctuation in their graph. All other submarkets that we compare to, there's a steady vacancy climb in 2020. And while we came down quite a bit early in 2020, we did have a little bit of a spike toward the end of the year there. And then finally, comparing us financially to the others as far as cost per square foot. Again, Easton sort of all over by itself. Their abatements and have been rolling off the books over at Easton, and they've had several new office buildings come into the market with some of their newer phases. So that is definitely driving up the cost per square foot over at Easton. You can see everywhere else stays pretty consistent. We do remain on the higher end for the rest of the group, mostly because Bridge Park is still driving up rent and they are charging top dollar over there and they're getting it. So we continue to remain a nice competitive market, but we are at the higher end compared to Easton. And that is my very quick update for the evening. I know I have about 15 minutes on the agenda and I only took up about 8, so I can spend the next 7 or so answering any questions that you might have.
For the committee's awareness, Colleen's presentation is the first of a series of staff updates. So she'll also be presenting during the work session later this evening. So you'll have another chance to ask her questions at that time. We do have a short meeting planned for this committee meeting this evening. And we do have our second topic, which is Jenny and Tammy Noble talking about the Historic District Task Force recommendations and implementation. So anytime that we free up from Colleen's time slot, which we had allotted 20 minutes to, we could dedicate to that conversation as well. But you'll be seeing staff reports at future meetings from building and planning as well. And the idea of those staff updates is just to provide you some additional insight into what those work units do and what the activities are that they perform, as well as to give you some face time and an opportunity to have a conversation with the staff.
Colleen, I just have one question relative to the industrial space. You said that you continue to meet with developers to look at construction of that industrial space to meet the needs. What's the pushback you're getting of why they're not interested in doing it if the demand is in fact so high? I would think it would be good business to go ahead and construct something knowing that you probably had some fish on the line.
Right. You know, a lot of it has to do with these buildings are typically one story, and the cost of green space, the cost of land, undeveloped land in Dublin is at a premium. So again, typically you want to get as much building as you can for the cost per acre that you're paying for a site. So this product does get a little priced out when you look at our land cost. But over in West Innovation, we actually do have very friendly zoning for this type of building. It's just a matter of finding available sites that are for sale for this product. I know, for instance, O'Brien Robinson, their building that they built along Shire Rings Road is about 10,000 square feet, 2 stories, not on a large plot of land, but people drive by it all the time and stop in and ask him if they can get a building like that built. So we're actually working with him to see if we can't get more of that size building built around that Shire Rings area. There's still a couple empty infill sites along Shire Rings where we think that could work and be a nice affordable product. So it really just comes down to price and timing and getting through a zoning process. Again, Shire Rings and West Innovation, where we have some straight zoning, would probably be the easiest to get these buildings accomplished.
Great. Yeah, that with Matt. It is a really nice facility.
So Colleen, at the last city council meeting, you know, we had the old theory, and I think you hit it all just perfectly. You know, we wanted to have corporate housing to get the CEOs in here, and then of course they would draw in their businesses to our office parks. And then you said, but there's sort of a switch gone on where we have to provide affordable housing for the employees, the IT people and stuff. And, you know, you sort of threw that out as a directional thing to us in zoning, and, you know, something we probably should be looking towards doing. Do you want to just amplify some of those thoughts or comments? What the change is in the entire structure of your world?
Sure. You know, I think COVID definitely exacerbated the work from home climate. As you're going to hear in our strategy later tonight, when Deb Cummings from Technonomy will be here, you know, tech is definitely one of our industries that we're trying to recruit. They're also the industry most at risk to be working from home. So if we can't get tech companies to fill office buildings, how can we get tech workers to be working from home in Dublin? A lot of them tend to want more urban walkable spaces. Some rent, some buy, but they typically want, you know, newer, more walkable areas. So I think, you know, as long as we continue to diversify the housing market at both ends, I think we will remain competitive. I also think the fiber to the home initiative that you're looking into becomes even more important, getting our apartments, our condos, and our houses all on the fiber to make them incredibly competitive as places to work. Some people want a 2-bedroom where they live in 1 bedroom and they have their office in another. So again, sometimes the smaller units tend to favor the at-home worker. So definitely something we should keep in mind while we're looking at tech as our primary industry that is growing here.
Well, you know, we used to have a zoning, well, we were considering South Dublin being zoned into a different kind of zoning. And at the time we invited the builders in I think it was the late 90s, and said, you know, it was more of a high density type of zoning. And they said, well, you know, they weren't familiar with it, but we showed them examples of how they'd save money on roads, on electrical runs, sewer costs and everything else. And I just wonder if, you know, it's been, geez, 20 years now, 30 years. I just wonder if they've changed their attitude now. And because there's such a drive now for people wanting 4 families, twin singles. And, you know, and that's where we could get, you know, younger people in. And then you also mentioned that many of our city employees actually don't live in Dublin, which is a sort of a hurt when you think about it from our position at city council. So I don't know if we should resurrect that kind of zoning and take a look at it. It was an overlay zoning. Back then, the developers said, well, the only thing we understand is we take a block of ground, and this is what landscape architects do, chop it up into grids, 90-foot lots, and we just fill up those lots. And that's the most expensive way to develop land. But then they said it's easy for us because then we know exactly how much the concrete or asphalt driveway costs, and that we have to charge them $3,000 more for a chimney. But, you know, maybe time has moved on and people have gotten more educated about good planning. And so, you know, maybe it's something we ought to dig back out and dust off in the planning department and take a look at it and see if we can resurrect that. And actually the plan, that particular plan is laid out in radiating units so that everybody has a good view out the back of their house. And it preserved all the greenways and green space and forests. So if there was a plot of land, the applicant actually planned the plot of land out to miss the forests and run the streets off like branches into pods. And it was it was way probably maybe too progressive for our time, for our developers. But maybe it's time now to look at that and then fill those pods up with 4 families or 6 families or duplexes. As I said the last meeting, I'm shocked at the price of the twin singles on Glick Road near 745 and how they just keep going up and up and up, and they're constantly filled up with people rehabbing the insides of them. And so I think, you know, that market that you were alluding to, maybe we could create that. Maybe we could put forth an effort and try to create that kind of possibility for people. So
Yeah, I definitely think while you're going through your framework 2035 plan, that housing discussion is super important there. And I know that there's some housing study underway and MORPS's involved too. So I think there's definite opportunities going forward to have much deeper conversations about diversity in housing in town. But I think from an economic development point of view, housing is becoming more part of the conversation than it ever has before, as far as making sure that we are an ideal place for workers who want to live close to work or work from home.
okay, thank you. Any
All
other
right,
comments?
thank you.
Colleen, you're amazing. I'll tell you, you're a giant asset to the corporation here. You really are.
And you are great for my ego. Thank you.
Knowledge is amazing. Any other questions for Colleen before we move to the next topic?
All right, thank you all.
Thank you. Jenny, are you up at this? Jenny, are you out there?
I'm here, sorry. I think Megan is gonna give a little introduction here before Tammy gets started. But
Okay.
yeah, we're gonna talk through the task force.
Sure thing. So we are right on schedule. And next we are going to talk about the task force recommendations and implementation. Tammy's going to walk through some of the background and then the follow-up information that was requested by the committee during the January 20th meeting. We also proposed some discussion topics at the end of the memo that are going to help guide staff's research and work preparing for the next CDC meeting discussion, which will further talk about the implementation of the recommendations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy.
Thank you so much, Megan. So I apologize for a slide presentation that's mostly words, but that's what we're going to do. And it's going to recap our last meeting. Give me just 1 second. Sorry, my computer is just not working with me. Hold on. So I think I will talk through this presentation. I'm so sorry, my screen's not working right. So just to recap what we talked about, Dana was kind enough to give us a brief presentation about the recommendations for the Historic District Task Force. And the task force, of course, hit on several points that we were delegated as a staff to follow up on. Most importantly, one was an area plan that we should revisit for the historic district. And of course, we had anticipated that that was the guidance that we would receive. The second of the recommendations drew more attention from the Community Development Committee, and that's the management of the district, which is something that's slightly challenging. There are many components to what that could look like in terms of complexity and intensity, basically. So we provided an analysis for the committee to look at, number one, what our resources are. Ms. Oh, thanks, Jen. Okay, so I'll start from the beginning. So again, we wanted to highlight what our recommendations were from the January 20th meeting with the commission. Essentially, we were asked to focus on resources that we're currently focusing in the district, and quite frankly, they're intense. We do, as a city, invest resources on many levels to the historic district. So we were asked to provide that information. The second is during our conversations about the historic district, we were asked to look at different management programs that are in and about the region, and kind of two directions that we've taken is Heritage Ohio, who was part of our task force project and is greatly in tune to preservation. So we did investigate different communities that have worked with our Main Street program, as well as a different type of modeling program that's out of the Cincinnati area. And they actually oversee the Over the Rhine project. So we've basically interviewed a few people that have worked with their group. And second, lastly, I guess we're looking at just maybe a more simplistic program of simply organizing the groups that we have invested in the historic district and organizing them in a way that we could provide feedback and collaboration with that group. So in terms of what we've been asked to identify for aesthetic improvements, there's general improvements that I would talk about, and that's general upkeep, mulching, pruning, landscaping, that sort of thing. Goes to the extent of taking care of the streetscape, which is important to the Historic District Task Force, as well as a more substantial financial commitment, which is the commercial facade program, which we have invested a significant amount of funds and provided some great revenue and, quite frankly, results from, all of which have obviously contributed to the upkeep of our historic district. In terms of financial commitments, Mayor Grooms had asked that we identify our financial commitments to the historic district. And quite frankly, this is really widely encompassing. So I just tried to touch on some major components that contribute to the historic district. And quite frankly, the most and foremost is the monetary contribution that we give to Visit Dublin through our hotel and motel fund, which is slightly less than $500,000 that we contribute annually to the group. We also contribute $50,000 to the Historic District Business Association, as well as, I would say, unattainable contributions to providing accommodations for the chamber, as well as various tax incremation finance districts that we've allocated in the memo.
Tammy, if I could stop you there, I was really looking for some of the numbers like the rental of parking lots from the church, the expenses to in the planter boxes and flags, and what are we spending in that district that we aren't spending in anywhere else in the city? And those were kind of the numbers that I was looking for. The hotel motel fund to Visit Dublin, you could contribute some of that, maybe in even some of their rent to the building they pay in the district, but I don't know that I would attribute that $960,000 to money that is expensed in the district. I think $50,000 for the HDBA is probably appropriate. Know what accommodations for the Chamber of Commerce, other than the fact that we rent them a building, and we do some sponsorship of events primarily for economic development. I don't know that that is attributed to the historic district, other than that's where their office happens to be. And then the tax increments finance district that provides revenue to the district. I guess I would, if that's 73.6, I would be interested in knowing where that money goes. If it's a revenue to the district, then what is it spent on?
Understood. So,
Appreciate into that.
sure. Andy, did you have a question? It looked like, no, okay.
No, I would say, this is going to be a, longer conversation than just the money, I'm sure, but to Chris's point, understanding not only what money is going to the district right now, and I agree, some of those allocations that you had on that slide, I wouldn't necessarily consider them allocations to the historic district in particular. But I'm also interested in knowing what other mechanisms are potentially available now or in the future.
Just in terms of programs that we could offer, or just
so things like the Federal Historic Preservation Credits, Community Reinvestment Act monies, Ohio Historic Credit Pipeline initiatives, other grant programs, things like that we're not taking advantage of now that would be additional dollars.
Right. Got you. Okay. So just a brief, Jenny, if you want to move to the next slide, I'll keep this extremely brief. Heritage Ohio was the first group that we engaged with, specifically because of their Main Street program. They are very focused on preservation, so I will say they do have a slant to their approach to historic districts. But again, we did engage with a couple of different communities that have taken the opportunity to engage with this program, and we're glad to answer any additional questions for the group. And on the opposite side of the world, there's a group out of the Cincinnati area that oversees Over the Rhine, and they're more of an investment group. They have a very interesting financial portfolio, but they do provide different mechanisms for revitalizing, specifically in Cincinnati, blighted areas. And we have engaged with a couple of entities that have interactions with the group, And again, we'll provide additional information for the committee if so choose. And lastly, again, a more simplistic mechanism that we've talked about for overseeing the historic district is essentially an oversight or a group that would capture all of the entities that have interest in the historic district and appoint individuals that would represent each individual group or entity, as well as the city and or economic development. This could be a task force, it could be a committee, it could be a board of directors, but essentially someone that could create some increased communication amongst the groups and help define goals within the group. So it's somewhat of an in-between of an actual management group that we would consider for the district. So discussion topics that we would like to pose to the committee. Can we provide additional information for resources that are allocated to the district? And I think Mayor Grooms touched on this a bit. We'll be glad to cover additional information that you've asked for. The second one. Is there additional information from different management groups, organizations that we could present to this body that could help you strategize as to what you want to see in the historic district? Andy, you alluded to this, but are there other funding mechanisms or financial structures that we should consider for revitalization? Almost lastly, what does the Community Development Committee see for their undertaking as we move forward with this project? And of course, any other considerations from the committee?
Hey, Tammy, thanks for putting this together. Those are really great questions, and it certainly is a lot to think about. So I really appreciate that. I'll try to be brief because I know we're on a timetable here. Additional information. Oh, I think the question's back up there. Great, thanks. You know, I would really like to get a really clear picture on what's the spend now, because I think that we are spending quite a bit of money. I'm not sure that we're spending it really well. So I'd like to get a really good handle on that. Presentation, detailed information by finance or economic development staff or other city divisions. I don't think we need a presentation. I think as long as we assemble that information, you know, I mean, somebody's present it. I don't know that finance or certainly anyone in planning would be more than capable of gathering that information from other staff people and bringing it to us. So I want to make a whole bunch of work for everybody. I would like to have additional information or presentations regarding management, organization strategies. You know, I think that it's important for us to have someone who is professional and someone who is well versed and fluent in what's out there and what's available, what could we go after, and maybe has had some experience of having success in those arenas. Maybe they've worked with the federal government on, historic kinds of things, or with the states, or with the Main Street organization, or somebody that is well versed in what's available, how to get it, and what criteria do you have to meet. Like, I would liken it to Megan's unbelievable aptitude in understanding what you can do for roadways, right? What all the funding mechanisms are that are out there, where to go, the criteria they're looking for, how to make the application so that it's most likely to be successful. That kind of skill set and translate it over to the historic piece. So that would be important for me. I don't know that it's necessarily somebody we want to have on staff. I'm hopeful that we can buy a part of somebody's time who does this somewhere else and has done it successfully, and we can buy 20-30% of their time, or whatever that number is, I don't know, and have them work on our behalf with the same success that they've had in maybe Westerville or Cincinnati or someone else. Those are the funding mechanisms. That would be my answer for 2/3. What does the Community Development Committee in these efforts? I think that we should probably gather this information, council as a whole, and say, this is what we think. Let's have the conversation among all 7 of us and see if we collectively think the same in a macrocosm as we do in this microcosm, and go from there. And other considerations of implementing the recommendations of the Historic District Task Force. The Historic District Task Force came with some good ideas, largely that have been in existence for a while. I think what we were probably hoping for from council was to come up with some funding mechanisms for the ideas. And we just probably didn't get that far due to COVID and the difficulties of meetings and a number of other things. So those are my answers to B3.
I basically what Chris said. She made a lot of very good points. I guess I would start at the high level. The Historic District Task Force came forth with a lot of tactics or action steps. But interestingly, what we're talking about tonight is what I think we should be talking about tonight. And that is who's going to be the leader, orchestrator, connector, or manager to make those things happen. So I think the first question is, do we want that person or that entity? And for me, the answer is yes. The Short North Alliance is essentially this type of an organization. We don't have to go down to Cincinnati. We can go to the Short North and see what they've done there. We can visit Worthington or Delaware and see how these programs work when you have a champion that's running the program. So first and foremost, I'm interested in pursuing that. Funding mechanisms obviously are very important, but there's some low-lying fruit. As Chris said, I don't know that the dollars we're spending now, I don't know what all those dollars are and all those sources are. And I know that there are other sources that we need to explore, but the dollars that we're getting are not necessarily being well spent or in the right areas. The facade grant program, $50,000 right there. We can't do it anymore as a city council, but this entity could do it for us. So there's $50,000. And then there's other money, say the Historic District Business Association, HDBA. I don't know how that money is being spent now, but perhaps could be repurposed. I'm not in favor of necessarily remolding an organization that's already in effect. I'm more in favor of creating something from scratch. As Tammy indicated, the Main Street Heritage USA program is more focused on preservation. For me, it's revitalization and preservation in addition to economic development. But we already heard from our all-star economic development person. We already have Scott Dring, who's hitting it out of the park. So the development will come to South High Street if we can beautify it. And I would argue it's blighted and decaying now. And the sooner we get after it, the sooner we can turn things around. So that's how I would approach it.
I agree with the. I would too would like to know how much money we have put in there. Actual cash dollars are going down into the historic district, and then, I mean, with that knowledge, I think then you go back to the next step where they had come up with task force ideas, and then analyzing. Okay, we put XYZ dollars into this thing. Here's what they would like to do. Are these ideas prudent, and are we overfunding, underfunding? And at that juncture, we can make a decision as to how much of their ideas we think is worthy of funding. I agree also that there's the kind of management people around here that I think have done this, and I worked with one of them down in downtown Columbus. for years, that, you know, where they assess them by the lineal feet and then come up with a chart on how much it costs to maintain that thing and keep it nice, and, you know, those kind of things. So that's all still pretty vague to me. I guess I don't understand fully all the different competing factions down there. A lot of the key land is owned by still a handful of people, and I don't know how flexible they were in the past. They weren't very flexible to new ideas, but I think all that's come to pass now. And I think the historic task force is now, I think, bridge that. So, you know, that's where my mind's at. You know, who's on A, who's on B, who's on C, and how can we get these people together? And maybe it is a management group that comes in and tells them, hey, this is the law, and we're tied to the government, and we're tied to your business interests and your residential interests, and we're going to be the mediator that helps bring this thing all about. So that's where my head's at. I agree with what Andy said and what Chris has said so far.
I would just add real quick, I do believe all of those parties need to come together, come to the table. I know for a fact that none of them are really interested, or they're not passionate about revitalization and preservation. And if they are, they're not doing anything about it. They're more business related, and those are their constituents that have a vested interest in the district, so they need to be part of the board of directors or whatever. I just don't think, as Kim Way put it, they're not the people that wake up every morning worrying about the historic district, and we need that person. So.
No, Andy, I agree with you. In years past, we've had a lot of really exciting initiatives down there and spent a lot of money running sewer lines and fixing things up, and made offers for landscaping the backs of their buildings and putting in parking lots and night lighting. And, you know, we actually did a comparison years ago as the cost of a parking garage or the cost of fixing the back of the buildings along Blacksmith Alley. And it was amazing how many parking lots or parking spots we could have if you wanted to revitalize the south side of that area. So, you know, and, you know, the blowback we got, and I think I mentioned this before, was, well, that's all great. You know, you guys can use it during the day, and then we could use it at night to revitalize the area. And, you know, we were going to pay for everything from asphalting to landscaping to putting in the curbs and parking areas for them. And it finally got down to, which was really sort of a shame, and this is after 2 years of foot dragging, when we finally got the real power landowners to the table. They said, well, really what we're interested in is how much money is the city of Dublin, after we spent all this other money running a sewer down their thing, fixing their permanent problems, how much money will you guys really give us so that we can let you park during the night in our area? So I hope that feeling has sort of eroded over time, and they've got a little more progressive in their thinking. But, you know, I still have that, you know, that fear factor that they're, you know, like you said, it's an economic thing for them. It's not a love of history. It's not a love of preservation. It's, you know, this is what I'm getting out of these tenants, and this is the money I'm making off of the rent, and this is what I give a damn about. So trying to move them to that next spot is, you know, probably very important. And all these things we're doing actually advances their position, increases their profitability and their chances for more revenue. But it's just getting them interested to that level.
I just realized that I didn't follow the checklist. You asked basically 4 or 5 different questions. Chris did that. I didn't. I would just sum up by saying I agree with Chris that the CDC's role is really to evaluate these options, mechanisms, and go back to council and present it.
Okay.
Well, thanks. You know, I mentioned a lot of categories of things that we are spending money on as a city at present. I don't know that that's all inclusive. Megan would have a better idea just from her time in public works of, you know, sidewalk repair and, you know, snow removal and, you know, street sweeping. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on for the things that we do in that district that we don't do for any other business person in the city. And so I think we just really have to go in eyes wide open and say, you know, this is the money that's available. Let's figure out a way to spend it really well And what's the best way we can do that. So that's what I'm asking for in terms of that holistic look. Is what are we doing for this, these 6 or 7 blocks in the city, right, that we don't do for anyone else. Those are the ticket items I'm most interested in.
And we have gone through the exercise of inventorying those maintenance tasks or activities that we provide in Historic Dublin that are above and beyond the, typical service level for the rest of the city. So we can review that, and then we can go through our records and quantify the incremental costs associated with each of those activities as well in advance of the next meeting.
Because then when we get an idea for what this expert would cost, right, then we can say, we could maybe not do some of these things, right, to fund this, or maybe it's a 50-50 match. Maybe we look at, other city revenues to cover half, and maybe we glean 50% of that cost from what we're already spending doing things that maybe we shouldn't be doing, somebody else might be able to do, or isn't really our job, or, kind of things like that. I don't know who else's sidewalk we fix in front of a building in the city.
Yeah. Well, there certainly is.
Can we hold them accountable to fixing the sidewalk themselves, because it is a public sidewalk? So that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the cost of maintaining brick paver sidewalks is more than a typical concrete sidewalk as well. So yeah, we can certainly gather that information and provide that in advance of the committee meeting. And we'll be prepared with more detailed information about the available options that are out there for an in-depth discussion on that as well.
And do you have the parking lot rentals, stuff like that in that?
We do.
That's scheme as well. Perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Megan, I think it'd be interesting for the CDC and maybe even for the historical task force to see the report that was done on parking down there and the upgrade on the south part of the historic district, because it's shocking how many potential parking spots there are down there. And with parking, you can sometimes have something that accommodates business and makes it a great place to pull into. And I think if you want to pull that report out, I think it's going to be very interesting in case Chris or Andy haven't seen that. And then we can dig back into the files and go back to the whole thing of upgrading their entire area behind their businesses. I don't know what's still around from that study, but where we were going to put in lighting and landscaping and try to upgrade their world. But all those things.
I still have a copy of all that. I don't know that attitude has changed all that much. That's not really where I'm not sure that's where we'd have the most success in the short term, but it's worth looking at for sure.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Tammy, do you have anything else you want to share with us, or Jenny?
No, but thank you. Thank you for helping me with my technical difficulties, Jenny. But thank you.
Okay, if is there anything else before the committee? Seeing none, is there a vote to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, so moved. Meeting adjourned. See you all in another 45 minutes.
12 minutes. Are we 5:30?
I think it's 6. It says 6 in board pack.
Yeah. Chris, you can get dinner in.